Merrill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Prateek.
Let's start with the basics. AI assisted coding has been taking off big time and it's making a lot of news. So, can you start with explaining what it takes to teach an AI model to just understand code and help us with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think at a super high level, you have to have like a massive corpus of data in order to teach a model to think about code. And this was like one of the biggest improvements if you look at the leap in going from the previous generation of recurring neural networks to now these large language models that we have. It's both the complexity of the model, like far more layers, but also just the scale of data that's required in order to give them that understanding. And once you have that, now that data set has been assembled by many of the companies building the base models, that you're able to train these like highly complex models on that scale of data. That's really kind of what goes into that was the big leap forward that in terms of like being able to understand to like build that understanding of code. More recently, what we've seen even bigger. A couple of things that we've seen in terms of advancements lately. One is that historically, one of the biggest challenges that you had was with code in particular. Well, this is true of any text, but code in particular is that you need to be able to both ingest enough context when you're writing code to understand what code has been written before and what this function or this file is trying to do, and you also need enough output in order to generate something that actually accomplishes what you're trying to get it to generate. And both of those previously, again going back to the previous generation of models, both of those were major limitations. Even with LLMs, we've seen that dramatically change, going from only 32 60K tokens now to seeing all these models coming out with like million token input windows and significantly improved output windows as well. So those, I'd say, are some of the main improvements that we've seen, and what's really enabled these huge leaps forward in terms of code understanding and generation over the past couple of years.
When you look at AI assisted coding, one common use case is you type in English like what you want and it generates net new code. Also, another big use case is, hey, here's a bunch of code I stitched together before going to production. I need someone to review it because I don't know. Like, many people are expecting AI to help them with that. So, AI assisted code review, like what happens in there, and also how is AI helping?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we think about a lot at Graphite is that so much of the innovation of LLMs and how it's been applied in terms of code in particular has gone towards what we call the inner loop of development. So that process you described of like opening up your IDE, completing what you're doing, or in the cases of some like compose features, being able to give a more general prompt and ask these great tools to go and write a larger piece of code. But a lot of what I think not that many companies are thinking about yet is the outer loop. It's only everyone who's been a professional developer knows that just writing the code is only the beginning of the process. Like, you have to make sure that it's tested and reviewed and deployed, and then make sure that's actually having the product impact that you want downstream. There's so much else that happens beyond after you've created that code change locally, and that's what we call the outer loop. All that collaboration, review, testing, deployment, and that I think is where we see a huge opportunity at Graphite, is that we can apply these same great models that are so good at generating code, and apply it to understanding and improving code that's already been written. And that's really where the AI assisted code review piece comes in. We don't think that a human is going to be taken out of the loop anytime soon. I think that it's really important that you still have, both for like understanding the code base, and also just for accountability and making sure that there's somebody ultimately responsible for this. You're still going to have the human in the loop for the foreseeable future. I think that what's important though is that much like with writing, the way it's done for writing code, you can make code review a lot more focused, and even a lot more like enjoyable and efficient for human review. much in the same way, I think a lot of folks have talked about how tools like Cursor are great at kind of helping more junior developers to just do more, and also helping more experienced developers to like focus their time on the high level architecture and not having to understand like this particular API definition. I think with code review, what we're seeing is that AI is really, really good at doing things like finding some of the bugs or nits or code based style inconsistencies that would take a first pass at a review to go and catch. And, might be hours of, or maybe even a day or more of back and forth of having to like re-request the review, get that approved. We can cut that out entirely by using AI to scan the code base or to scan the PR in just a few seconds after the update. So I think that's really cutting down those number of review cycles and focusing human time on the high level. Is this architected in the way that we think it should be? Is this doing what we want to do from a product standpoint? That's really the promise of AI that we're realizing in terms of improving code review.
If you look at the current landscape of AI assisted code review, how would you describe it in terms of what can we do well and where are the gaps? And this is, let's assume this is before Graphite, outside of Graphite.
Yeah.
Like what can the world do well today?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen so far is that AI is really good at finding. I'd say there are kind of two classes that we've seen so far. There are like the bug and nit bots, which are there are a lot of tools, a lot of companies that are just building like GitHub bots that go through and will scan for bugs or nits. There's some tools like Ellipsis, Reptile, CodeRabbit. There's a ton of companies that are just building tools like that. And then on the other side, actually what's been here for a longer time and isn't necessarily based on LLMs, but has the same kind of interaction model, are security scanning tools. So you have tools like SonarQube, Sneak did this quite well, GitHub Advanced Security. There are a lot of tools that kind of already have this interaction model of something that autonomously scans every change that's made, flags potential issues, and then in some cases will suggest fixes there. I think that's what we've seen so far on both of those is that they work pretty well for more limited, smaller bugs, smaller changes. What's a couple things that I'd say are missing though. One is kind of higher level, senior engineer level of input. I think a lot of the tools right now will, they can find small issues, but they aren't able to give you like architecture or like performance improvement suggestions, the type of things that maybe one of the more senior engineers on your team might be reviewing for and might just have more context on. And then the other piece I'd say is at the moment it's very much just it's limited in terms of how the depth of the interaction with it. It leaves you a comment and maybe it leaves you a suggestion and that's about it. But there isn't this sense. One of the ideas that we're really excited about with Graphite is making PRs like in motion by default. So can you have agents that are guiding the pull request or guiding these code changes through the process by default and doing things like self-healing when there's a case when CI fails, resolving merge and rebase conflicts, basically keeping code flowing constantly instead of having to have a human engineer at each checkpoint kind of advancing it along the process.
And if you look at the point at which you launched Graphite, what was the initial motivation behind launching it? And also, how did you decide what features should go into that very first version of Graphite?
Of Graphite, particularly, Graphite the platform, or of Reviewer?
Let's do both. Actually, let's start with both. And this is more of
Yeah.
a product question, just understanding like what should go into, or rather, how do you decide what goes into the V1 of any product?
Yeah, that is a great question and one that's always kind of hard to grapple with. So in the beginning, I'll talk about both Graphite, the code review platform, and then Graphite Reviewer, our AI-powered review companion that's a part of it. So Graphite in the beginning actually came from an internal tool that we built. We were working on a subset of the team was working on a different idea in DevTools at the time, building like an iOS app release and rollback platform. Had some customers for that, but wasn't getting a ton of traction. And a couple of the hires that we made. So my co-founder Tomas was at Meta for a long time. A couple of our early hires as well were his old teammates, and pretty much universally, the first thing that they'd say when they'd get a company before it was called Graphite, and we'd set them up on GitHub was, how do I do this? How do I do code review without Fabricator, Meta's internal tool? And one of them kind of famously said, wow, this makes me feel like a caveman compared to the tool chain that I used to have. The pain, it happened a few times, and the pain for them was so much so that they actually rebuilt what became the first version of the Graphite command line interface in an internal hackathon a couple months in, and basically started using what became Graphite for a few months before we even thought about like making it available more broadly. It just so happened that it came up in conversation with some other like ex-Meta folks, that those folks on the team who built it knew, and basically the response was like, wait, can you guys give us this? Like, we have to have this. Can you build this for us? Like, we miss this tool too. There's sort of this like universal recognition of like anybody, and this is true to this day, of like pretty much anyone you ask who's spent time at Meta. If you ask them, do you miss Fabricator? Do you miss like Stack Diffs or Stack PR's workflow? Pretty much universally, like every engineer who's been there will tell you, like, yes, this is like the thing that needs to that hasn't, that I had there, that I missed the most, kind of working with a more publicly available tool chain. So that was basically from there. We heard a lot of excitement about it. The other product we were working on wasn't getting a ton of traction at the time. Had a few paying customers, but nothing super exciting. We basically ran an experiment where we said, we're going to work on this full time for a month. If we can iterate on this and get to like 20 engineers at companies that we know that are using it, every single workday at the end of the month, we'll pivot the company and focus entirely on code review. And we ended that month with 50 engineers at companies that were well known, just through like word of mouth. At that point, we'd put them all in a Slack channel, and we maxed out the number of like Slack connections that you could have in one channel. And we weren't charging at that point. We were just basically asking everyone who's participating to spend an hour with us, or spend half an hour with us every week, and give us feedback, and basically pay with there's like the mom test, is famously like get people to pay with either like their time, their money, their time, or social capital. And in this case, like giving us that money, or giving us that time in lieu of paying us anything. That was kind of the validation of like, if they keep coming back every week, we know we're onto something. We know that that they're giving us feedback. And the journey, obviously, fast forward now, and we're really excited by the scale of multi-thousand person organizations that the Graphite serves. Throughout that, I think the constant user feedback, and the generosity of Graphite users to like tell us what's great, and then also like tell us what we're messing up, has really helped us iterate and build a great product in that time. I'll come back to then Reviewer in particular. Really that one, I guess, similarly came from an internal idea. Greg, my other co-founder and CTO, was playing around with like applying LLMs to review for a while. This was like a year and a half ago at this point, and Greg would do some of these experiments on the weekends, like add things to the code base. For a while, it was, some of the team honestly found it kind of annoying, of like, what's this bot doing, commenting on my PRs? And we tried it. The models at that point, the models weren't quite good enough. And then really it was only with some of the big model advancements last spring and summer that this became more of a reality for us, and that the capabilities were there for us to actually do AI code review. For us, I think it started with one, kind of looking at like comps from bigger companies. So Prateek at Google, their internal code review tool, actually for many years has had like an AI-powered commenting and suggestions feature. They were even using like older generation models before LLMs, and now obviously that's gotten a lot better. So there was some good like prior art there of big companies implementing this internally. And then we also were obviously chatting with our users a lot about this. We had some inbound requests to build a code review tool with AI. And then we obviously involved our larger customers early in the process, and got a ton of great feedback from them in the early days. Last thing I'll mention on kind of scoping is really it's always painful, I think, is the short answer. is you always want to add, for us, we had this great vision from the beginning of, it's going to suggest changes and it'll fix CI failures, and you'll have, it'll index the code base fully with RAG, and you'll be able to generate custom rules and English prompts to have it. And ultimately you kind of have to cut it down to like, what is the, I'd say, one, what is like the minimum amount of value that you can provide in a well-designed experience, and I think critically have a feedback mechanism for it so that you can improve and iterate on it. So for us, like being able to with reviewer, having like the upvote and downvote, having a way for users to like give feedback on every suggestion that it's making, that was critical for us, both in like testing different models and prompts, and validating the usefulness of reviewer, and then also being able to constantly iterate and improve on our prompting and the critics that we're using in order to generate the comments. So that's how I'd say we thought about kind of the scope, launching both reviewer and Graphite, and then also the scope of reviewers, like initial.
Amazing. That's so many good nuggets in here. Okay, so now you decided what goes into the product, and now you launched it. Can you talk about the early days? Is always hard. How did you land your first paying users? And also, what did you learn from them? Like, obviously they were in your Slack channel, you were talking to them.
Yep.
What did you learn from them? And also, maybe part C here is, what feedback did you end up incorporating in the product itself?
Yeah, it was a long process for us. We were in closed beta for about a year and a half, actually, between. So we did that initial like 50 user test. We had sort of the initial alpha of like 50 to 100 users in like fall of 2021. It was right before Thanksgiving in 2021 that we launched our waitlist more broadly. We launched on Twitter and Hacker News. We had like thousands of developers that signed up in that first 24 hours or so that we were like front page of HN. And then we had a referral mechanism built in to kind of, if you got 5 or more folks from your team, we'd put you to the front of the wait list. So there was like a nice mechanism for kind of sorting out the teams that were most serious about this. Then we were in closed beta working closely with them for the next year and a half or so. And a lot of what we realized, one, building a code review platform code review is a massively complex process. There's so many different parts of it. We were building on top of GitHub's, which is both, I think is like, we have a great partnership with GitHub, and that gives us like the interoperability and partial adoption pathway was fantastic for us. But it's also really hard to build like a syncing engine with GitHub's PRs. Like, we sync like millions and millions of changes every day, and have infrastructure challenges at the scale of a company, 100 times our size, but just because of the nature of what we're doing. And early learnings were, one, you kind of need to build the entire platform end to end. Like it is one of those cases where it's hard to, if you wanted to do stacked PRs, like you can't just have, there were existing CLI like open source CLI tools out there for like stacking branches locally, but you really need kind of the Facebook and Google style end-to-end tool chain to do this workflow right. Starting from, and a lot of the difficult lesson of what we learned in closed beta was that you do need to build all of it. Like you need the local experience of how I'm creating and updating branches and pull requests locally. You need the review platform that shows you the relationships between all the stack PRs and helps you prioritize like what you need to take action on at any given moment and actually go through and review them. For larger teams, you need a merge queue that's effectively efficiently making sure that everything is tested and avoiding merge conflicts, keeping your trunk branch green. Really, like you do need that whole tool chain in order for this workflow to really function at scale. And I'd say that was a big lesson, was just the scope of how much that we needed to build to get this to like a really incredible experience end to end. And then I'd say the other big piece was in figuring out what to charge. Like we knew from the beginning that we didn't want to charge individual developers. I don't think that's ever like a great business model in dev tools. So we knew that we needed to create value for teams and organizations. That was so first building. I think we spent probably the first half of, at least of that closed beta period just completing kind of the individual user experience of how do I create, review, and merge pull requests on Graphite. And then, even then, once we had that foundation, we then had to go and build the organization and team value on top of that. So that was features like the merge queue engineering insights, automations, which are like an if this then that for PRs the teams will use for like assigning reviewers or adding context or defining an order in which folks have to look at PRs and review. Things like that are more like beneficial to orgs and enterprises. But we had to build, first you build that foundation of like the individual use case that's going to be free, and then on top of that, building like the team and organization value that we ended up actually being able to charge for.
Now that's great. And going from day one, meaning you launched the product, and to today, obviously you're bigger now. So you must have conducted a whole bunch of growth experiments. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. So if you had to pick one that really tilted the curve for you, and also another one that you thought would have worked amazingly well, but completely ended up like did not perform the way you thought. So what are those one example for each, if you will?
Yeah. The growth side of it is always like a big question for us. So I'd say maybe one experiment that worked really well for us. I'll mention like the viral waitlist component in the beginning. Like that was amazing for us, both in terms of like vastly increasing the number of signups that we had to the initial waitlist, and then also I think it was a great filter for like which team, anytime that you introduce a little bit of friction to the process, it can be like a great sorting function for like how serious a team is about using your product. And for us, many of those like first waitlist signups were actually have now become some of our larger enterprise customers. So I think like Snowflake was on there. I'm trying to think of some of the other examples. There are a few examples like that of companies. I'm not sure that I can say them, but a few companies of that scale that have that signed up from the very beginning, and then have been kind of Graphite users throughout. So that one I'd say highly recommend doing something on that order. Trying to think of one that didn't work as well. Actually, I think one recent one I'll point to is actually the initial launch of Reviewer. So we gave all existing Graphite customers a month free of using Reviewer in their repos. You just had to have like someone in the org go and opt into it and turn that on. And interestingly, I think what we noticed and what we realized is that a lot of those initial users, and this was like back like in like late summer before we even launched Reviewer publicly, a lot of those initial users churned just because the quality wasn't there. We tried to we were iterating on like our prompts. Also, the like Claude released a big update to 3.5 Sonnet that dramatically improved performance of Reviewer. A lot of in the beginning, a lot of those comments it was like too noisy. A lot of the comments weren't accurate, and I think one of the big realizations that we've had is like developer trust, and this applies kind of throughout the product, is that developer trust is just so hard to build and so easy to lose. If you have this is like one of the biggest problems with AI products in general, and many of the AI code review tools out there, I think, is it's so easy for something to just be written off as like, oh, this is noise, I'm going to ignore this on every pull request. And by nature, I think AI is pretty yappy without a lot of prompting, a lot of editing, and developers don't like that. It doesn't really, if you have something that's adding 12 nonsense comments, or even sometimes it'll have like some things that will be frustrating to a developer. Like for a while, we had to actually add a critic to our model to get Claude to not suggest adding a comment on top of every single function. Like things like that. There's some things like that it will do just based on like all the data that everything that it's trained on. Might suggest that that's a good thing to do. A lot of developers are going to be annoyed by that. So it took us a while to really refine. And I think that's when we launched the product, and in the iterations that we've made since then, we've really focused on high signal, low noise, building something that's trusted, that you think of as like another senior developer on your team, rather than like a yappy spam bot that's adding 12 comments that you just like automatically minimize whenever you open the PR. But I think the big lesson there is like the growth, giving a free month, like promoting something, like the growth side of it doesn't work if the substance isn't there. And like that is like the, fundamentally, I think having a product that is, that is going to get the type of user love that you need, like that's kind of the foundation for like any sort of growth experiment or like growth marketing.
Now, going to where Graphite is today, and you can pick a metric of your choice, but how do you describe the size of Graphite today? Could be number of customers, teammates, number of people you've served. So where is Graphite today?
Yeah, so Graphite today, I'd say we have tens of thousands of paying developer of like paid users that are active on the platform, creating, reviewing, and merging PRs. In the hundreds of customers and it's fun to see kind of the variety of customers as well. We have everything from small teams that are like just going through YC. Sometimes we even have like research labs, or our favorite customer. One of our favorite examples is this team, Proxima Fusion, that's building like next gen fusion reactors, and all of their modeling software they're developing with Graphite. It's just, I think one of the awesome things about DevTools is that you get to see all these teams that are building incredible technologies beyond what you'd ever think of doing with with your tool. And if we can, I think one of the things that's so exciting and for us as a team is like we get to help improve their workflows, and if we can give them even like a 5, 10, 20% of their time back that they would have spent like bogged down in code review, think of like what they can create with that time, and like how much good that they can do. So teams like that, all the way up to now companies with 5,000 plus engineers that are running their processes on Graphite, and that's like the scale of enterprises that we support. I think that's really perhaps the cool part about this is that Graphite, the Stack PR's workflow, and a lot of the tooling that we build, it's amazing from day one of just starting code review as a company. But I think it really has the most benefits for massive enterprises, multi-thousand person teams, monorepos where you have thousands of engineers trying to merge changes concurrently, and you need to manage the merge conflicts and potential problems of that. That's really the reason why these technologies and workflows were developed at places like Google and Meta, and that's really where the value of Graphite compounds the most.
I mean, tens of thousands of users. That's a lot of users, and to serve them reliably. Obviously, on day one, when you have 4 users, you can just stitch a bunch of stuff together. But when you're serving these many users, there has to be a lot of reliability. So,
Yes.
Can you walk us through the tech stack behind Graphite as it stands today to serve all these users?
Yep. Yeah. And I'll say, definitely like reliability at our scale is something that we take very seriously, and we feel acutely and our users feel acutely when it's not available. So we usually, whenever there's one funny thing that we noticed is like whenever there's a GitHub outage, because we're built on top of GitHub, usually our users know when there's a GitHub outage before GitHub even puts a status page up or anything. Like they'll just say like, hey, Graphite's not working. And sometimes it's an us problem and sometimes it's a GitHub problem. But just the, knowing usually within a few seconds of any sort of outage, like, our users are on there. And I think it's a testament to like how, the responsibility that we have building something that's like so core to engineering workflows. And we say that basically next to the IDE, and this is true for looking at the data, is like next to the IDE, Graphite is the tool that engineers are spending the most of their time in every single day. And that's both, it's super exciting and rewarding for us to like build something that has that position in the developer workflow. But it's also like a huge responsibility and something that we need to make sure that we're providing like a really high availability and like high quality experience. So, our tech stack, we're based, a lot of our entire team basically uses TypeScript across the product, even down to the CLI. We use like Yorks for the CLI. So we can maintain consistency. Like every engineer here can work on every single part of the product. And as part of onboarding, actually, we have every engineer write a pull request in each different part of the product to make sure that they're familiar with it. Everything's hosted on AWS. We use ECS and Docker. Our backend is mostly Node, Postgres, TypeORM. On the front end for the Graphite web app, we use a lot of like React and MobX. And then Reviewer itself is mostly powered by Claude 3.5 Sonnet. We found that we have a great partnership with Anthropic. Actually, my old co-founder from my past startup that I did a long time ago is now like a key engineer at Anthropic, and it's kind of fun to get to work with Eric again and talk about ask him for features, and they've been really great partners to us. There's a great case study that they published on Graphite Reviewer pretty recently. So we use 3.5 Sonnet for most of the reasoning. We're embedding with OpenAI, storing everything in PG Vector. Yeah, I'd say that's the majority of the stack. Again, a lot of the difficult part about Graphite and what a lot of our team goes to is just maintaining that syncing engine with GitHub, where we're ingesting like millions and millions of updates to PRs across all the organizations that we serve, and we have to do that in like near real time, so that everything that we show on the Graphite interface and everything that you're seeing on GitHub, things like even something as simple as like emoji reacting to a comment, getting that down to, it took us so long to get that down to like less than 1 to 2 seconds of latency between like doing that on one side and having it show up on the other. There's so much in terms of like, optimistic UI and, all these little things that you have to think about to make sure that you're providing a great product experience and having this be like totally interoperable between the platforms.
It's amazing. All right. I have one final question before we go to the rapid fire round. Where do you see the future of AI-assisted coding heading in the next 2 years? And also, what role will Graphite play in that?
Yeah, I think this is perhaps the most exciting part of kind of where we are in the developer life cycle, is that if you look at how like agents are improving rapidly, how both the base model context windows and output windows and reasoning capabilities are growing so quickly. What we're seeing, and I think it's a pretty commonly held belief, that all these agentic development tools are just going to get better and better, and more of the world's code is going to be written primarily by agents versus human developers. And if you think about like, as these agents get better and better, what happens to the developer workflow as we know it? Like, it probably doesn't look like someone sitting in an IDE, editing character by character, line by line anymore. It probably looks more like how I interact with like one of the engineers on the team, which is we have kind of a high level task that they're gonna go and perform or implement. They do that. They send me a pull request. I go through and like give feedback on that. I might open it up in like an ephemeral environment and play around with it. I give feedback in the form of comments on the PR, and then we kind of go back and forth. They iterate on it, and eventually I approve it and it ships, which is code review basically. So I think that's really the exciting part, is that one of our core beliefs here is that code review is going to become the inner loop will kind of be absorbed by the outer loop in some way. And like as agents are leading on more of the world's development, the way that we interact with them will look more like how we interact with human engineer teammates. It'll be more conversational. It'll happen, on the pull request and on the artifacts that they're producing. And in that world, I think, Graphite could become, we talk about how Graphite is sort of second to the IDE at the moment in terms of amount of time developers spend in every day. I think there's a world in which like code review and Graphite in particular, can become the place that engineers are spending the most time every single day. The place where they're going to kind of both kick off and then interact with agents, and a place where like humans and agents come together to create amazing software.
All right. With that, we're at the rapid fire round. I'll ask a series of questions, and I'd love to hear your answers in 15 seconds or less. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1. What's your favorite book?
I love Never Split the Difference. It's made a huge difference for me personally in terms of how I approach negotiations and hard conversations.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. Highly recommended. Right. Next question. What has been an important but overlooked technology trend in the last 12 months?
I think in AI in particular, there's this great blog post called The Bitter Lesson, which talks about how, the model, people keep trying to extend like each iteration of the model and figure out like the prompting tricks and everything, but none of it really matters. Every 6 months when the models jump, it just completely changes everything. Everyone kind of has to reset and figure out how to work with it. So over time, I think it's just the base models kind of catch up and overrun everything.
What company do you admire the most and why?
I really admire Shopify. I think I had the pleasure of speaking with Toby a few months ago, and I think they do an amazing job of keeping such a high percentage of like core engineering at scale, avoiding the kind of bloat and like both product and org certification that happens as you grow a massive company at the scale that they've done.
What's the one thing about AI assisted coding that most people don't get?
The inner loop isn't really the blocker. So much of what happens, so much of what holds up changes at enterprise scale is like the outer loop of code review testing and deployment. And like that's you can't really much of the benefits of these like inner loop tools have even yet to be realized because of how much of a bottleneck like processes like code review are.
No, that's a great point, actually. What separates great product from the merely good ones?
I think that it's especially in AI in particular, it's like thoughtfulness of experience. Does it do what it implies it can do? Does it get out of my way? Does the mode of interaction make sense? Like a chat interface isn't the answer for like every task that you can perform or every job to be done. Does that make sense? And lastly, is like how easily does the matrix break? Like, does it set expectations that then it can't deliver on very quickly? Because kind of as soon as you hit that wall, all of a sudden the magic is gone.
What have you changed your mind on recently?
Well, I think a good one was sleep tracking. I previously was a big skeptic of it. I got the Aura ring for nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got the Aura ring for Christmas, and it's made a huge difference. But not necessarily in like it's helped me get more sleep, but also just like setting expectations for like how well rested am I? Like what should I expect of myself on any given.
Now that one's been a huge thing for me as well. So I can't stop talking about it now. Anybody I meet, I tell them how much of a difference just tracking and understanding your sleep has made. Suddenly, for no like other reason, my energy is better, and it just like you're more energetic, you're more present, and if you
Yeah.
just get your sleep right, a lot of good things can happen. So yes, I'm definitely on board with that one. All right, next question. What's your wildest prediction for the next 12 months?
Maybe it's not quite the next 12, but I think it's that like the local development goes away. IDE, like everything that's happening locally on your computer ends up being like far less relevant in the development process, and everything just get like it's sort of the logical extension of the like Andre Karpathy like vibes based coding that was you tweeted about the other day. Is like I think like pretty much everything becomes like vibe based coding, and the interaction becomes more code review than code authoring of code.
Right, right. All right, final question. What's your number one advice to founders starting out today?
The MVP, as previously thought about, is dead. Invest in product experience, invest in design, make sure that you're early. Like the bar is so high now, even for enterprise applications, and both the bar is so high and the barrier to entry is lower than ever with all these great AI tools. So go the extra mile. Get the details right of your early product. Build something that isn't going to like suffer just because you didn't put in the effort to build an amazing product experience, and let the core value that you're delivering shine through with that.
Amazing. Merrill, this has been a brilliant discussion, and I just loved the insights you had on just building and shipping a functioning product that can be used by tens of thousands of users, paying users. So thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Prateek. Really enjoyed the conversation.